With the growing concerns about our planet's future, it is important to understand the causes, effects, and potential solutions to combat climate change. Climate change refers to long-term alterations in temperature, precipitation patterns, and other climate factors. These changes are primarily driven by human activities such as burning fossil fuels and deforestation, which releases greenhouse gases into the atmosphere. This has led to significant changes in weather patterns, such as increased temperatures, erratic rainfall, and prolonged droughts in some regions. These changes disrupt agriculture and can lead to food shortages, water scarcity, health challenges, and adversely affect the livelihood of Nigerians. Today, we'll delve into the present global issue that affects us all, but with a focus on its impact in Nigeria. Thanks for joining us once again. I am Chana Ejoga. Stay with us. More to come after the break. Welcome back. If you're just joining us, this is Policy Focus, and as we said earlier, today we'll be discussing climate change. To do that with me, I have Dr. Murtala Olani Oke Ikal, who is the acting head of Department Science and Technology and Innovation Studies at the National Institute for Policy and Strategic Studies. So it's good to have you on the program.
My pleasure.
So let's go straight to it. Can you tell us what are the key objectives of Nigeria's national climate change policy and response strategy?
Thank you very much. That is one of the measures put in place by the government, high growth economic development, and build a climate resilient society through the attainment of the objective. One of the objectives is to implement the mitigation measures and that will promote low carbon. So in essence, what I'm saying is that the national climate change policy response and strategy has a focus, and the focus is to achieve a low carbon emission in the country.
Okay, so when you talk about achieving low carbon emission, what are the processes?
You see, it's one of the, like I said, there are a lot of policies in place. This is a strategy. And the strategy put in place bit by bit activities that needs to be done in order to achieve this particular goal. And the goal, like I said, is about what? To foster low carbon. And then number one thing is the federal government thought that there is actually need to reduce the emission, reduce climate change impact. And that is why we need to talk about mitigation measures. When you say mitigation measures, that is, we want to attack the climate change problem from, we don't want it to, the causes perspective. So we don't want it to actually happen. So before we will now go to climate adaptation, which is about, okay, it has happened, how do we now measure it? So there are a number of things that the government put in place in that to enhance national capacity, to adapt to climate change, to raise climate change related science, technology, and innovation at the secondary school institution, and to increase public awareness, and so on and so forth, and to strengthen the national institutions. There are national institutions like the Federal Ministry of Environment. We now have in place National Council on Climate Change as the big body that will now be, as the coordinating body, that will now be, managing the climate change implementation in Nigeria. These are efforts put in place by government, among other efforts.
So what I really want you to do is to break it down to layman's language. Okay. You talk about adaptation, mitigations. What are those step-by-step processes that a layman would hear and understand that, okay, these are the measures that the government has put in place, and then these are the steps. So, can you give us examples of those steps?
Now, thank you very much, in order to ensure that, okay, institutions, because when we're talking about climate change, we are talking about impact on water, impact on environment, impact on transportation, impact on forest and forestry. We are talking about air, aviation. So these are climate change have implication on all of this. And so the federal government put in place, in line with Paris Agreement, Kyoto Protocol, and so on, what we call nationally determined contribution. Nationally determined contribution. This nationally determined contribution, even though it's from global perspective, I mean, request from the global, but individual country now put in place nationally determined contribution. The contribution is to say that each ministry implicated by climate change will have to tell us how they want to deal with climate change in their domain. For instance, Ministry of Environment, we have industries under the Ministry of Environment monitored by NESTRIA. NESTRIA is the agency, federal government agency that gives industries permit all the discharge into the water, into the landfills, and so on. The permit is given by the ministry, by NESTRIA. So the NESTRIA can now say that this is number of industries we have. These industries pollute the environment or have tendency to pollute the environment. They now agree that between this time, 5 years, 10 years, they want to reduce their waste, solid waste, liquid waste that is being discharged into the water body or into the air. So that becomes a nationally determined contribution from the Ministry of Environment. From the Ministry of Agriculture and Forestry, they now begin to say that we have the number of trees that is standing in Nigeria. This is the number of trees that is standing in Nigeria. How much of it has been cut? They determine it. They now said, okay, for afforestation program, which means planting new trees, this is what we plan to do. This is how far we have gone about cutting trees, and this is how far we have. So that forms what we call nationally determined contribution from each sector. So each sector will now determine that and then submit, and then the National Council on Climate Change take hold of that and begin to now look at it in relation to what we are doing yearly and see whether we are meeting up with the target 2021 to 2030 and so on and so forth. That is how it is done.
Wow, that's very, very interesting to know. So I would want to ask, concerning the energy sector now, how does Nigeria's climate policy aim to reduce greenhouse gas emission from the energy sector? Because we know that is also one of the areas or one of the challenges that we have concerning climate change.
At the moment, the energy sector we are having great challenges as far as energy sector is concerned. But the federal government, through NEC, they have been able to put in place measures to ensure that the energy challenges are tackled. Now, we have number of energy policy that we have put in place. We have the Renewable Energy Master Plan, 2005 to 2025. So we have National Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Policy. We have off-grid electrification strategy. We have multi-year tariff order. We have feed-in tariffs. We have net metering. We have competitive procurement. We have Nigerian Economic Sustainability Plan. We have National Energy Policy. All these are set to tackle the challenges of energy in Nigeria. Now, look at the Renewable Energy Master Plan. The essence of it is that By 2025, renewable energy will contribute 10%, between 10 or 15%, will be contributing to the national grid. So, and this was set 2005. So, Nigerians have a very good policy in place to actually address energy challenges. We can begin to discuss what are the challenges we are having. But the point is, we have national energy policy, and we also have institutions. We have National Energy Commission in place, apart from Federal Ministry of Power. We have Rural Electrification Agency that are put in place that are constituted to provide energy into areas, remote area. And they have to use renewable energy. We can discuss, to how extent they have performed also, but that is secondary. But the fact is that we have Rural Electrification Agency that's supposed to take energy to the rural area, making use of renewable energies and alternative energy, and so on and so forth. So that is what my response for now.
Okay, so what I want to know is there any body, like a regulatory body, to regulate these sectors to see that, they stand or they operate by these policies regards climate change?
Yes, I've mentioned some of them now. Apart from Federal Ministry of Power, which is providing overarching policy, we have Energy Commission of Nigeria. It's a regulatory body. In fact, we have National Electricity Regulatory Agency, NEC, Commission, that are, regulating energy suppliers, energy distributors, and so on and so forth. So we have beautiful institutions in place. We have legal framework, we have policy framework, and we have institutional framework.
So can you explain Nigeria's efforts to promote renewable energy sources as part of its climate change policy?
Thank you very much. Earlier on, I mentioned specifically that there is National Renewable Energy Master Plan. And it actually started 2005 and it's rounding up 2025. As a matter of fact, National Institute is evaluating that policy at the moment in 6 states. At the moment, we are evaluating how far we have gone about the implementation of this master plan. So we have master plan that addresses renewable energy, inclusion of renewable energy into the national grid. So because in Nigeria as a government realized that we have enormous resources, renewable resources that could be tapped. From Maiduguri to Sokoto, we have enough solar. And we have on our hills, Mambila, Jos Plateau, Indori Hill, the possibility for wind energy. We have biomass. And we have on our ocean, tidal energy. We have wave there that we can generate electricity. So Nigeria felt there is need for that, to explore that and put in place measures. And also put in place institution to implement that. And that is Rural Electrification Agency, apart from Energy Commission of Nigeria. And we have also research R&D department, R&D, research institutions in Nigeria across geopolitical zones that are researching into how do we develop local energy, all these energy sources, how do we do energy materials, instruments, technology, such that it could be like solar panel. We have NASENI. It's an institution of the government, research institution, that goes into researching into renewable energy, and they have been able to produce solar panels. But they have a challenge of uptake of such solar panels by Nigerians. So we have institutions that are in place to take it up.
Okay. Earlier you mentioned that there are institutions or there are sectors that handles every area, and you even have the bodies that can tell us, that can give data of the number of trees that we have and the number of trees that, or the level of deforestation. So my next question is, what measures has Nigeria taken to address deforestation and promote reforestation in line with the climate policy?
So, thank you very much. Like I said the other time, we have Federal Ministry of Agriculture, and under this Federal Ministry of Agriculture, there is a forestry department. Apart from that, from the regional perspective, the region put in place National Agency on Green Growth. I mean, we call it National Great Green Wall.
Okay.
It is actually a regional, and when I mean regional, it's organized by the African Union. So we have an office in Abuja, and they are to plant trees from Somalia to Sudan,
Okay.
across the desert in Africa. Yes, and that is exactly what they are doing. They call them National Agency for Great Green Wall. And they have been able to plant enormous number of trees. That is different from national plans and national activity under the National Forest Policy. As far as Nigeria is concerned, Nigeria put in place National Forest Policy that outlines government commitment to sustainable forest management, conservation, reforestation. So yearly, there are a number of trees that are being planted. That is the meaning of it. That is the meaning of it. So there are also legal framework like the Forest Act, like a Timber Regulation Act, that are put in place to regulate the activities of cutting trees in our forest. There are also community-based forest management measures, that are put in place in order to empower local communities to participate in the management and conservation of forest. So we have forest guards. It could be moribund, or they may not be performing up to the expectation. But the point is, there are measures in place to ensure that our forests are protected and a lot of trees are being planted. And lastly, there are individuals now giving license to plant trees as a business, because of the fact that government is preventing cutting of trees. So, but giving license to individual to now have your hectares of land, plant trees. When it becomes mature, you can cut and sell. Wow. It is purely business. Okay. That is business, actually.
You said these measures have been put in place.
Yes.
But then, how effective is it? Because, let me give you, for instance, we have a lot of infrastructures going on in the area of housing. We have estates that are being built, have people selling houses. But if you look at the structure of those estates, there is no space for trees to grow. If you want this thing to be global, that means it has to affect every sector of the economy, not just the rural areas, but urban. So how effective are these measures being taken? We know they are there, but then how are they putting it into practice? Are people being aware of this, and how are they being sensitized?
Yeah, thank you very much. What we have come to realize is that sector by sector need to talk to each other. There is a national forest policy, there are urban policies, there are rural development policies, but these policies need to talk to each other. For instance, you mentioned housing. The way it is done is that before you get approval for your housing estate development, for any development in Nigeria, there's something we call environmental impact assessment. This environmental impact assessment, it is sacrosanct on anyone that is about to carry out activity that will have major impact on the society, whether rural or urban, to tell us through the Federal Ministry of Environment or State Ministry of Environment what are the likely impact of that particular area. And if I want to break it down, what it means literally is that you bought 20 hectares of land, 10 hectares of land, even 2 hectares of land for housing purposes. We will want to know how many trees are in that particular hectares of land. How many of them are you going to cut? What are the, not only trees, the mangrove, the wetlands, the rock, the soil type, and so on and so forth, that are in that particular hectares of land and you want to use for housing. So you have to carry out what we mean by environmental impact assessment. This must be submitted to the Ministry of Environment and in fact to Urban and Regional Plan Department before approval given to that particular housing to be constructed. And in fact, you have to tell in that particular report, the EIA report that to be submitted, how you also want to replace the trees you are cutting, the mangroves, how do you want to ensure that it is there because of the ecosystem that they are, and so on and so forth, including the social impact of that particular accommodation or housing that you want to put in place. The second level is that measures is in place. EIA Policy Act is in place in Nigeria. How our people, how are they complying to it? We have enforcement department. So we need to talk to the enforcement. But most importantly, we have realized that all these sectorial issues, we have to cooperate together. Everybody must talk to each other. Urban regional planner must talk to the Ministry of Environment. Ministry of Environment need to talk to Ministry of Works. Ministry of Works need to talk to Ministry of Transportation, because you are putting a housing in place. Yes. There must be road there, and then you need to talk to each other.
It is all interrelated.
Interrelated. Because it is now interrelated, we need to talk to each other, and that is why we now have National Council for Climate Change. That National Council for Climate Change has a huge responsibility. I don't know whether they are already doing that particular work, but their work is to coordinate all the ministers and the state commissioners are members of that council. What it means is that if you want to do any major work in your area, please tell us so that we understand it together. You want to put out a housing in place of 1,000, so over 2,000 families will be there. They might need a primary school. They might need a secondary school. That is Ministry of Education. They will need water. That is Ministry of Water Resources. They will need road. That is Ministry of Works. So we need to talk to each other. That is the essence of it.
It's really exciting to see how interconnected these ministries are, how they're working hand in hand.
Exactly.
Now, how does Nigeria plan to enhance climate resilience and adapt to the impact of climate change, particularly in vulnerable communities?
Thank you very much. Nigeria has put in place a lot of policy. Number one, put in place policy. We have National Climate Change Policy 2021. We have National Adaptation Strategy and Plan of Action. We also have adaptation policy from agriculture to flooding. We have policy in place. Water resources policies are in place. We have infrastructure policy in place. So from what I've said now, you see that they are sectorial, like I said. So because they are sectorial, Nigeria now also put in place measures, legal framework. Each of these policies, they now have legal framework in order to ensure that there is continuity. And then we now have institutional framework. So for flooding, we now consider Ministry of Water Resources, now look at flooding and now put in place 3 or 4 measures, institutions. We now have National Hydrological Services Agency. that will be telling us yearly that we might have flooding in this particular state and so on and so forth. Early warning signs. So the National Hydrological Service Agency gives us early warning signs that, oh, we might have in 25 states, we might have flooding. So that is the first level. The second level could now be, we now also have River Basin Authority, which says that, okay, when NIPSS tell us we are going to have a lot of water, rainfall, they have dams. They are the one controlling dams. So the dams will contain that water to the best of their ability. When we now want to have excess water, NIPSS will tell us, guys, around Lokoja, please leave that area. We are going to have flooding. We now also have ministries. Under the Ministries of Environment, they also have Planning and Policy Unit. They have Orientation Unit. We have National Orientation Agency. They will be talking to those around to be flooded that please leave that particular area. It is going to be flooded in the next 2 days. So there are measures to ensure that communities are resilient. Complying to it, that is second level. But there are measures in place to ensure that places are not flooded, and if there are flooding, people are not affected, properties are not affected.
Okay. Now, you said an area that's very, very interesting, and that is when you say measures are in place. Recently, we have floodings in places like Lokoja, even Abuja. And the question is, people didn't even know, let alone being aware that, okay, there was going to be floodings. It seems these bodies that are responsible to send these warning signs are not active. So what is really the gap in this implementation strategy that it's always limiting, and you see Nigeria always falling behind, having these issues? What's really the problem?
I want to divide the issues into maybe 2 or 3. So there are institutions, primary institutions, that are looking at flooding from mitigation measures perspective. Okay, flooding should not occur. Flooding should not occur. All those ones that I mentioned. Okay, Ministry of Water Resources, River Basin Authority, trying to open up. They have dams already in place. We might need more dams. I agree with you. Dams are in place. Okay, what is the essence of the dam? Water is released. They are there to prevent the flow of the water, to reduce the flow of the water. And then we have those institutions are in place. So there are flood mitigation measures. Then there is issue of flood adaptation measures. And so the Ministries of Environment, the Ministry of Information, Orientation needs to do their work. You see, for efficient institutional workings, 2 or 3 issues. Number 1, are they professionally, do they have the professional training to actually do the work they are doing? Number 1, are they professionally trained in service training to handle the work they are doing? Are there enough funding for them to actually do their activity? We had the course to have interactions with the National Orientation Agency, and they said they don't have enough resources to do their work. And what is their work? To orientate people, especially in the local language. We cannot assume that people can listen to English. You need to, Benue now, you need to go to the local level to talk to them in their local dialects. Yoruba, Ogbeni, Ojumaro, Korare, Kumbeyan, Kere Kumbe. It has to be to that level in the local dialect. Who will do that work? State Broadcasting Agency, State Ministry of Information. We have agency that call cultural, that has to do with cultural. Those are the one that has to do it. Do they have the capacity to do it? We need to find out. Are they trained enough to know that they have to do it and respond in time? Do we put our budget in such a way that it is on standby, that when it is needed, you can actually access it?
But shouldn't that be what should follow before establishing such parastatals or establishing such sector, to ensure that the personnel that are there are well trained and they are professionals and the resources are provided for them to execute their duties?
Yeah, it should be. It should be. I mean, it should be sacrosanct. I mean, we shouldn't be talking about that if we are serious-minded. You shouldn't be talking about whether, I mean, you are talking about flooding, for instance. Then you will need engineers, water engineers. We need hydrologists. But let us make a trip to our Ministry of Water Resources and see how many engineers do we have. How many water resources experts do we have? How many sociologists that could have a conversation? How many psychologists do we have in the department that handles emergencies? And so on and so forth. And then lastly, next question. There appears to be a kind of, the interest of the government is towards emergency management. That's why we have NEMA. Every time we have flooding, NEMA should go and do. NEMA is National Emergency Management Agency. That is more of the worst has happened. Let us manage it. So
they are not supposed to be used for.
They are not the one that's supposed to be.
When are they?
That is NEMA, SEMA, LEMA. Okay. At the local level, they call Local Emergency Management Agency. At the state, most of the states have State Emergency Management Agency. What we are saying is that, and let us go and check how much is being pumped into that NEMA in relation to how much is being spent. I mean, we learned that Lagdo from Cameroon, they released water last year, and we are having problem. Down this year again, that same Lagdo, they have released water. So, which agency is supposed to? And one of the plans is to put up a dam. So, what have we done about the dam up to now? And that's supposed to be Ministry of Water Resources, in between Federal Ministry of Power and Federal Ministry of Water Resources. And what has been done so far? Okay, so federal government set up a technical committee, presidential technical committee, to unravel. And the federal technical committee has submitted their reports. And so, what has happened so far? We are going to have same flooding that happened last year, this year. I mean, we are already having it at the moment. So, agencies are to work. And they are to pick up their even annual budget from bottom up. So, it's not from just thinking about it from the top and then. And this flooding will show actually whether the government is a serious one or not. So we got to be very serious with managing cases like this.
In as much as it's very taxing, we can see that it's also very challenging, being that there are measures in place, but yet we don't seem to have the manpower, we don't seem to have the financial inadequate resources to carry out these things. Another thing I would like to ask is, in terms of the Paris Agreement, what role does international collaborations play in Nigeria's climate policy, especially regards the Paris Agreement?
Yes. Internationally, we have been attending COP, we have signed Kyoto Protocol, we agreed with the Paris Agreement, and then we have been able to develop our nationally determined contributions. All these are fantastic policies. They are in place. But what we are talking about now is about, like you said, you rounded up, the funding, the manpower, and the political willingness to actually implement what we have agreed to implement. It's as simple as that. So, put your money where the issues are biting you. Then correct it. We need a dam around Benue, Taraba, Axis to contain the water. Don't forget, we don't have enough energy to power Nigeria. And there is hydropower. So this same water can actually provide electricity for us in Nigeria. I mean, are you getting it? So, internationally, there are promises. The last one, loss and damage fund, there was an agreement around loss and damage fund. We have to put it on the record that so far, Nigerians have not been able to to maximize the opportunity of the international collaboration, especially in terms of getting climate finance. This climate finance, South Africa have been able to get much of money internationally. We have not been able. What we are getting is, okay, UNDP got some money, and then we now apply, and then UNDP now come and say, okay, we want to build 25 boreholes, 100 boreholes, want to build some schools. Okay, flooding happened, some communities are affected. Okay, we gave them beddings and some foods. There is need for us to assess climate fund, and there are plenty. Green climate fund, global climate fund, that we need as a Nigerian to assess, and that is that kind of money that can be used to finance infrastructure that is needed to prevent further flooding, drought, or soil erosion in the southeast, or coastal flooding in the southern part of Nigeria. That is the kind. So we need that. We need an institution. I understood that we need a kind of institution that will be driving, that will be accrediting interesting individuals or agency to be able to assess that fund. And Nigeria as a government needs to work on that to be able to assess international funding. So far, so good. We have not been able to assess that funding. So internationally, what we are doing at the moment is to attend COP. We attend COP, we have good negotiation, we negotiate, and they agree with us. Internationally, they have not been able to release money to us, and we have not been able to access those money, and so we don't have money. Nigeria don't have that kind of huge fund to be able to take care of flooding, to be able to take care of drought and desertification in the northeast and in the northwest, and the coastal flooding down there, and in fact to venture into high-scale solar panel production and lining up in order for us to get electricity.
It's getting deeper and deeper, but we'll take a break now and we'll be back. Stay with us.
Go straight into introducing what climate change is. Like I said, not the scientific part of it, but just mentioning to you generally that climate change is a sustained significant change in the weather patterns over a long period of time, caused by two basic factors. But there's a school of thought that still has this impression that climate change is not caused by these two factors which I'm mentioning. On the other hand, an unnatural process or anthropogenic factor involving human activities, which includes industrial activities, that either emits large amounts of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere, that depletes blankets naturally beach in the environment to protect livelihoods against the enormous global warming that brings about climate change. We also have another school of thought that thinks that, well, it's a natural phenomenon. For recent scientific information, if you have been following the news, you would have heard that. We just concluded globally a session, a meeting that took place in Switzerland, where scientific reports of science, of climate change, shows that the weather, the climate, is not going to get better if we continue with what we're doing. Because that increase in temperature that is threatening to extinct mankind is on the increase, except we do something as an individual, as a government, or as the world at large. Therefore, there are instruments that have been put in place in the global scene called the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change to ensure that responses to this climatic issues that is increasing the temperature across the world should have instruments that will reduce the greenhouse emission and also enhance things and also bring up adaptation measures to the impact of climate change. Climate change is real. With the evidences shown in scientific reports, like I said, that came out from the International Panel on Climate Change. It's a panel made up of scientists around the world that have come together to provide an insight to the scientific basis of climate change. The global efforts to address climate change, like I mentioned, includes the International Treaty, which was adopted in 1992 at the UN Conference on Environment Development at Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. Following that, there was a Kyoto Protocol established in 2004. Only recently, in France, the world adopted the Paris Agreement at the COP21, the Conference of Parties, and established the rule book for this agreement, which is being implemented up until now. Nigeria joined the race, not only ratified this convention, but also ensured that we brought it to bear on the national scene. And Nigeria as a party is committed to a number of outlined issues within the article of the Paris Agreement. The UNFCCC, which was adopted in 1992, entered force in March 1994 with an ultimate objective to achieve the stabilization of greenhouse gas concentration in the atmosphere at a level that would prevent dangerous anthropogenic interference with climate system. Like I mentioned, climate change is a result of brings about the change, the variance we see in weather, causing extreme weather conditions all around the globe. We're hearing hurricanes here, you're hearing of floodings here, you're hearing of increased desertification. If you look at Nigeria's land map right now, geographical land map, you see that the desert is coming downwards to the middle, and the coastal lines are being eroded and coming straight also to the middle. So what you initially had, that vegetation, is slowly disappearing. And there is that possibility that in the nearest future, Lagos will be underwater because of the coastal erosion that is going on, the increased rainfall and the increased flooding that is taking place. In recognition of this, processes needs to be achieved within a time frame that would allow the ecosystem to adapt naturally to climate change and ensure that food production is not threatened, livelihood is not threatened, economic development is done in a very sustainable manner. Let me walk us through, like I mentioned, the history of this within Nigeria. Nigeria has been impacted by climate change. It's not news. We're all aware of the desertification, the drought, like I mentioned, flooding, soil degradation, but Nigeria is not sleeping. There have been responses by the government and several policies, programs to address these challenges are in place. For us within the Department of Climate Change, housed in the Federal Ministry of Environment, with a mandate to carry out national actions in partnership with various relevant ministries, departments, agencies, private sectors, CSOs, NGOs, we work very closely with this that I've mentioned to ensure that we provide the kind of strategies, national develop strategies to mitigate, like I mentioned, and also align with already existing agenda and national documents like the Nigerian Agenda 2050, medium-term national development plans, the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, the National Integrated Infrastructure Master Plan, and a whole other policies that are required for economic growth, job creation, poverty eradication, while promoting sustainable development. And you're all aware that only recently, to provide a political will to that, Mr. President signed the Climate Change Act to give a legal framework, legal backing to the national climate actions that have been existing and policies already existing. I also mentioned to you that Nigeria is a signatory to several international agreements, conventions, including the Paris Agreement and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. These agreements and conventions reflect Nigeria's commitment to addressing climate change and promoting sustainable development. But this does not go without issues and challenges. And that's why we're here, to put heads together and provide a discourse that would open up forum to either improve where we are and take us in the direction that this global issue is not just only on the front burner, but also finds its place in every sector, in every other discourse, especially as it relates to development.
To mitigate the effects of climate change. One of them I remember was the planting of forest trees, creation of a forest belt in the Sahelian region of Nigeria. Recently, I've forgotten how many billions, they say, so many billion trees have been planted. Nobody followed up. We don't even know whether the money they assigned for that project ever got to the project. But as usual, government will come and do a ceremony, plant a few trees, and that's the last you hear of them. So our government efforts at mitigating against climate change has not been very effective. The other problem that has been compounded by climate change is the annual flooding. Again, when the Lago Dam was built in 1982, government had agreed to build a reservoir in Nigeria across the Benue State to manage the excess water that can flow from Lago Dam. 1982, we are talking today 2023. Nothing has been done. It's recently that they are talking about doing something about it. Nothing has. So government has not been very effective in mitigating the factors of climate. Now, we are told that warming of the environment is a major effect, and that is an international problem. They talk of the gases and other factors that have contributed to this. I'm not sure that Nigeria has ever taken any step to actually reduce the level of gas emission into the sky. Well, we know that they are now trying to encourage us to move from using fuel-driven cars, to use of gas, to use of electricity. But that has been more mitigated by the high price of fuel than in an attempt to mitigate the effect of climate change. I hope that if the high price of fuel can lead us to move away from using fuel and gas and use gas and electricity, that will be excellent. But other factors require a lot of long-term change, and I think government has a lot to do to handle that.
How it has affected me personally in terms of the places some of our brothers live, the floods, packed people's house, made some people homeless, come to the farmland, packed a lot of people crops that they have already farmed. So someone that went to farm was affected, expected to harvest the good crops, and the flood come and sweep the farm crops away. So definitely the person is left with nothing. So how do you think such person cope with the family, school fees, house rentage, and other livelihood responsibility for the person? So that is just one or two places that I know affect people. It's two ways. Climate change affected the price in the market. While, for instance, if 2 million Nigerians farm and the flood now sweep the crops of let's say about 1,500 people, can imagine the ones that left. So there will be not enough food in the market, and the population of Nigeria is much. So those that have it, they would like to raise the price up in order for them to make more profits. So two, the fuel subsidy of ethane, they affected a lot. Because the price of fuel now, like me now, I'm based in Abuja. As in from Abuja down to Jos, I know how much I spend for fuel to fuel my car. Okay, if a liter of fuel is let me just say 700 naira, because what they put on the meter is not what we are buying. If you check it properly, it's 700. Buying 700 times 75. But my car, if I want to fill my car, it's 75 liters.
Keep watching.
Keep watching NIPSS Policy TV.
In conclusion, there are a few comprehensive reports and papers that provides useful evidence and discussions of the various impacts of climate change throughout Nigeria. The vast majority of the literature that provides evidence of climate change impacts and responses, however, focuses on the agricultural sector and on individual farming communities in particular regions of the country. Discussions of other mitigations and adaptation measures in the literature often takes the form of recommendations rather than examples of what has already been achieved. This is likely due to the need for much greater implementation of mitigation and adaptation measures in Nigeria. In addition, while there is some discussion about necessary capacity building at the individual, group, and community level to engage climate change responses, there is much less attention given to higher levels of capacity at the state and national level. It's crucial for individuals, communities, and governments to take action to mitigate effects and adapt to the changing climate. This is the much we can take on today's episode. I am Chana Ejaga. Bye for now.
Keep watching.
Keep watching NIPSS Policy TV.